Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out the moment that saved Bob Dylan's career.
By the mid-1970s, Bob Dylan was in a personal crisis and was looking for a way out. His marriage was heading for divorce, and musically, he was at a dead end. Dylan had a choice: continue down the same path, running away from fame and popular music, or to bet on his past, return back to New York, and fall in love with songwriting again. The result was Blood on the Tracks, his most personal and exposed album. But who would be the winner? His future, his marriage and his family? Or his past, his legacy and his music?
Oh, interesting. I don't know much about Bob Dylan. Y'all be sure to go to David Hartley and like and subscribe. Who was Bob Dylan married to? Was it Joan Baez? Did they get married? Or, on November 22nd, 1965, Dylan quietly married 25-year-old former model Sarah Lowndes. Way to go, Bob. A model. Nice. I actually have never listened to Blood on the Tracks. I think I've probably heard a song from there. I think I had a Bob Dylan Greatest Hits album at one point, but I don't remember. I don't really know much about it. I like his lyrics. I've never been drawn in by his singing, but I respect it. Tell me more, David.
The story of Blood on the Tracks begins way back in 1961, when Dylan was signed to Columbia Records by John Hammond. The signing was unusual at the time, and Hammond took a big risk putting his trust in Dylan.
Well, when Bob was signed in '61, he really changed the whole image of Columbia Records. Columbia was an MOR company. It was Sing Along with Mitch, it was Johnny Mathis, it was the tried and the true.
50s.
His singer-songwriter style was unique, but Hammond saw something in the young Dylan and got him signed. They worked together on his debut self-titled album. Hammond was the producer, and it wasn't that successful. Critically, it received mixed reviews, and commercially it had modest sales at best. But Hammond didn't lose faith, and kept him signed to Columbia, despite the lack of promise seen from this first record.
Yo, that never happens. Now if your first album flops, you're out of there. They don't want you no more. But back then you had time to develop and find it. I think that's great. And this guy, John Hammond, if he didn't believe in Bob Dylan, we wouldn't have Bob Dylan. This guy changed popular music forever. Way to go, John.
Did you ever, for a moment, have any doubts that Dylan would become the force that he
None
did?
whatsoever. They tried to fire him after his first album. And I said, over my dead body. This is one time I did win.
Over the next few
Okay, so the record label did want to drop him, but John Hammond was like, no. Over my dead body?
Over the next few years, his vision would become a reality, as Bob Dylan would go on to become not only one of Columbia's most successful artists, but one of the most important voices of his generation.
Yes.
His work from this time is some of his most well-known, records such as The Times They Are A-Changin', Highway 61 Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde were hugely important and successful, and with this came big commercial success for Columbia. Part of what gave Bob Dylan this success was his ability and courage to always stay true to his own voice, pushing the boundaries of what was considered conventional and even possible. Sometimes this led to some very vocal criticism, such as the time he went electric, abandoning the folk community.
He just changed altogether. He's changed from what he was. He's not the same as what he was at first.
And then Albert will come and go, boo.
But by the late 60s, this once held voice of a generation was starting to distance himself from American popular culture. He'd left New York, and wanting to focus on his new life as a family man, he made a conscious effort to escape the fame that came with being Bob Dylan. Of course, this came at a cost, musically. His work from the late 60s no longer faced American culture head-on, but instead turned its back on it. And for 3 years, between 1970 and 1973, he released no new studio albums, only a compilation and some work on a soundtrack. After his contract...
Wait. So this is in the early 70s. Wow. So he was first signed to Columbia in 61? His first album came out in 62. Then he had 3 successful albums. So we're in the early 70s now. 60s are gone. The Beatles have broken up. Disco's on its way, y'all. Heavy metal has started. Who was the top artist in 1973, I wonder? Tony Orlando, Jim Croce, Roberta Flack, Marvin Gaye, Paul McCartney and Wings, Chris Christopherson, Elton John, Billy Preston, Carly Simon, Diana Ross, Vicki Lawrence, Clint Holmes, Stories, Helen Reddy, Billy Paul, the Edgar Winter Group, Dobie Gray, Sweet, Stevie Wonder, Cher, the Isley Brothers, Grand Funk Railroad, Sylvia Robinson, Dr. John, Skylark, Stevie Wonder. Okay. The Carpenters. Okay. Elton John, Donny Osmond, Stevie Wonder. Okay. Yeah. It seems like the folk thing would work for him in the 70s, you know? This is after all the psychedelic stuff. I feel I was not alive at the time, but I feel like there was a folk kind of revival thing in the early 70s, wasn't there? Maybe not. Maybe I don't. Maybe that's just in my own mind. I don't know.
3 years between 1970 and 1973, he released no new studio albums, only a compilation and some work on a soundtrack. After his contract with Columbia came to an end in 1973, he signed with Asylum Records. There are reports there may have been a falling out between Dylan and Columbia, but it may have just been he was looking to try something new.
Okay.
This new chapter at Asylum should have been exciting, a fresh opportunity to restart his career. But it didn't go as planned. He released 2 albums under Asylum, and it's not that these records weren't successful. His first album from this deal, Planet Waves, was well received by critics and topped the Billboard album charts. And his second album, Before the Flood, a live album with the band, was called the most energetic thing Dylan had ever done.
I think I've heard that. Hang on. I don't know Planet Waves. Let's show me on Apple Music. What songs are on that? Forever Young, Forever Young. 2 versions of Forever Young? Same song, 2 versions. One after the other. Okay, interesting. I don't know much about Asylum Records. Did they get bought by someone else? Let's check them out. An American record label founded in 1971 by David Geffen, who later, David Geffen Group, right? One of the biggest record labels ever. Okay. Oh, it was taken over by Warner Communications, now the Warner Music Group, in 72, and later merged with Elektra Records to become Elektra Asylum Records. Okay, yes. Okay. Apparently David Geffen is a very influential guy. I mean, he's very convincing. So I could see why Dylan would sign with him.
Flood, a live album with the band, was called the most energetic thing Dylan had ever done. The trouble was that personally, Dylan was on a path that seemed impossible to resolve. His absence from the forefront of music wasn't because people lost interest in him, but in fact the opposite. He was trying to run away from his past. He didn't want the fame that came with being Bob Dylan. All he wanted now was to focus on his personal life. He writes in his memoir, "Outside my marriage, nothing held any interest for me."
I just about had it, though. I'd had it with the whole scene. Just being pressed and hammered and, expected to answer questions is enough to make anybody sick, really.
But people would camp outside his house. Superfans like the writer A.J. Weberman would go through his bins. Everywhere he went, people would look at him and know it's Bob Dylan. Why is he no longer the songwriter he once was? For some reason, Dylan felt he couldn't have both
life
worlds.
force out of him.
He couldn't be this leading force in music and a simple family man. And the more he tried to force one to exist without the other, the more they both suffered. This inauthentic version of Bob Dylan was affecting his marriage, and his attempt to distance himself from the musical world didn't help the music he made. In the end, the marriage wasn't going to work, and Dylan was left without a choice.
Interesting. So he's battling with his career and his family. That's a pretty common struggle, I think, right? Also, fame, like, he's trying to get his anonymity back. That's not going to work. Just knowing now. We all know who he is now. It's not going to work. Sorry, Bob.
After his 1974 tour with the band, he began a relationship with Columbia employee Ellen Bernstein. He also began spending more time in New York, taking painting classes and becoming friends with the painter Norman Rabin. Painting with Norman helped Dylan to see things in a different way, from a different perspective. And he concedes that this time in New York put further distance between him and his wife. "It changed me. I went home after that, and my wife never did understand me ever since that day." This time when he was painting also helped him to connect to his true understanding of music. How he connected to folk songs when he first moved to New York. Folk songs were the way I explored the universe. They were pictures, and pictures were worth more than anything I could say. As David Geffen, the co-founder of Asylum Records, said, "Dylan has made a decision to bet on his past. I was more interested in his future." Dylan retreated back to his farm in Minnesota with his new partner and wrote 17 songs which would later be formed into Blood on the Tracks.
Okay.
In May of 1974...
Oh, wow. Now I'm seeing the title Blood on the Tracks. Makes sense. Oh, he went back to Columbia is what this article's saying. David Geffen said, Bob Dylan has made a decision to bet on his past. I was more interested in his future. Okay, interesting. The tour I put together sold a huge amount of records for him. Every time he did a concert, he sold his catalog. He has a lot of stuff in the vault that's about to come out, but with this deal, ownership of his masters reverts to him at the end of 5 years. Also, he gets a retroactive raise on his past records. What I did was make it possible for him to get back his masters from Columbia. He should thank me. At the time he went with me, yeah, that is a big deal, to have control of the masters. Otherwise, the record label controls them. They could do remixes of it and all that kind of stuff with it. Or they could keep Bob from getting a hold of them. We don't know where the tapes are. Sorry. I don't want to get ahead of the video, but he went back to Columbia, y'all.
Future. Dylan retreated back to his farm in Minnesota with his new partner and wrote 17 songs which would later be formed into Blood on the Tracks. In May of 1974, John Hammond, the man who first signed Dylan to Columbia in 1961, got a call saying that Dylan was at the Columbia building and he wanted to meet. This time, unlike their first meeting, Dylan was certain of what he wanted to do.
What's wonderful about having Bob back now is he tried making it away from the company, and he found out that Columbia was his home. And I think the album is going to prove how different Bob is when he's completely comfortable with his surroundings than he was last year.
Interesting.
When he first previewed the songs to close friends, the reception he got wasn't great. Mike Bloomfield, who played guitar on Highway 61 Revisited, said, "They all began to sound the same to me. They were all in the same key, they were all long. It was one of the strangest experiences of my life." All of the songs were written in open D tuning after Dylan met Irish folk musician Paul Brady, who showed him how to play these chords in this unusual tuning. And at first his idea was just to play stripped-back acoustic arrangements of these songs. Keeping with the theme of returning, the album was also recorded in the old Studio A of Columbia Records. And yet again, he took an approach to recording that was unlike anyone else.
Studio A at Columbia. I think that studio is gone now, isn't it? CBS 30th Street Studio, also known as Columbia 30th Street Studio, and nicknamed The Church, was an American recording studio operated by Columbia Records at 207 East 30th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues in Manhattan. Show me on a map. Where's this? Ah, yes. Condos. Of course. That seems to be what has happened to many recording studios. Well, I guess we have a housing shortage, so it makes sense, but dang. Some consider this to be the greatest recording studio in history. Numerous recordings were made there in all genres, including Ray Conniff's S Wonderful, Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, In a Silent Way, Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story, original Broadway cast recording, Chicago's Chicago, Transit Authority, Chicago and Chicago 3, Pink Floyd's The Wall, as well as recording about the city itself, Frank Sinatra's New York, New York. Wow. It was originally a Presbyterian church. There was one big room. The recording studio was 97 feet long by 55 feet wide with a 50-foot-high ceiling. It was huge and the room sound was incredible, said Jim Reeves. Recession woes combined with high operating costs for the energy inefficient old church spelled the beginning of the end for the studio. Columbia Records failed to buy the building for an estimated $250,000, equivalent to $810,000 after inflation, when they abandoned their contracts with the studio in 1982. Columbia felt constrained by restrictions imposed by the owner, including a closing time of 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. Oh no. The owner then sold it for $1.2 million, and it was quickly reacquired for $4.5 million. The building was later demolished. A 10-story residential apartment building called the Wilshire, completed in 1985, was built on the site. Dang.
This album, unlike any album that's cut, with groups these days was finished in 5 days and mixed in 2 days.
That's
now,
amazing.
This is, absolutely unprecedented.
And so, just like that, the album was done. He played the test pressing to his brother, and he didn't like it. He urged Dylan to re-record some of the songs again, and so he went back into the studio at the end of December and over a few days recorded 5 of the songs again.
Wow.
The result is that on the final album, 5 of the songs were recorded in New York in September, and 5 in Minnesota in December. The differences in these 2 recordings are minimal. As you're listening, you probably wouldn't notice that it was recorded at 2 separate times.
Really?
Also, this stripped-back acoustic sound that he wanted is largely gone. But despite the heartbreaking nature of some of the lyrics, the album is generally quite bright and energetic. To me at least, anyway.
Hang on. I want to go back to this list. Okay. Tangled Up in Blue. Wait. Simple Twist of Fate was recorded in New York City. Show me on Apple Music. Blood on the Tracks, Blood on the Tracks. This is New York. Got it. Okay. And what was another one? Tangled Up in Blue in Minneapolis. Let's hear Tangled Up in Blue. I think the track recorded in Minneapolis sounds better. Sorry, Columbia. Sorry, New York. Minneapolis wins.
The differences in these 2 recordings are minimal. As you're listening, you probably wouldn't notice that it was recorded at 2 separate times. Also, this stripped-back acoustic sound that he wanted is largely gone. But despite the heartbreaking nature of some of the lyrics, the album is generally quite bright and energetic. To me at least, anyway. That is until you hear the many outtakes and alternate versions of these songs. There's one particular example that I'd like to show you, and it's with the song You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go. On the final album, Blood on the Tracks, it's upbeat and energetic. But this alternate version from More Blood, More Tracks is so personal, so exposed, and so heartbreaking.
I've seen love go by my door. It's never been this close before. Never been so easy or so slow. I've seen love go by my door. It's never been this close before.
Oh, I like that better.
It's the same song, sung by the same person at near enough the same time, but they're such different interpretations. Yeah. On one hand, it could be about the time he was apart from his wife, knowing their marriage was ending. On the other hand, it could be about his new lover, and not wanting to spend any time apart. On Blood on the Tracks, it's possibly my least favourite song, but on More Blood, More Tracks, it's probably my favourite on the whole album. Much like his first album at Columbia, Blood on the Tracks received mixed reviews when it was first released. NME said the accompaniments are so trashy, they often sound like practice takes.
What?
But this album plays an important part in the legacy.
Yeah. There was another quote. John Landau of Rolling Stone said, "The record has been made with typical shoddiness."
Trashy, they often sound like practice takes. But this album plays an important part in the legacy of Bob Dylan, and is now considered one of, if not his best albums. Not just because of its musical content, but because it marked a turning point for Dylan as a songwriter. Interwoven between all these songs is this civil war between his past and his future. And these alternate versions from the bootleg series really show how he was looking in both directions at the same time. Ultimately, his decision to bet on his past paid off. Not just with this album, which helped to revive his career, but also with his legacy as one of the greatest songwriters of his generation. In hindsight, it took the breakdown of his marriage for him to reach inside for this music. He thought his marriage would take him away from his best days as a songwriter, but ironically, it actually led him there.
Wow. Y'all be sure to go to David Hartley and like and subscribe. That is amazing. I've never heard of an artist leaving their record label, signing with another one, and then coming back to another one. He just showed up at the building. Bob Dylan has always seemed like a mysterious person to me, and that adds to the lore, I think. He just showed up. He didn't call ahead or anything. So there's an album called More Blood, More Tracks. That is very interesting to me. Where can I find that? Sampler. I guess this is it? Tangled Up in Blue. Oh, cool. I can't play it on YouTube, but I just listened to a little bit of it, and of course the lyrics are perfect. They're beautiful, they're smart, they're different, but simple and universal. Very talented songwriter. The different versions of that one song is really impressive, And I think that just points to his talent, you know? It's the same song, but because of the way he performed it, it's a whole different message.
This close before, never been so easy or so slow. I've seen love go by my door. It's never been this close before.
That is amazing. So this album is him looking at his past and his future, not sure which way to go. But by revisiting his past, he forged his future. I never knew that he went back home to Minnesota. He went back home to Minnesota. He re-became Robert Zimmerman. Amazing. I'm going to go listen to this album, y'all. I'm excited about it. Well, y'all, thanks for watching this with me. I'd like to say thanks to my patrons. I'd like to say thanks to my patrons. Thanks to my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.